Hello and welcome to another Simply Conveyancing video. This time we're going to be discussing the options available to customers during this lockdown period, basically to allow and indeed ensure that exchange completion can still continue, especially considering we've got the backdrop of the current stamp duty holiday currently ending at the end of March. So to do this, I thought it would be worthwhile to introduce you to our speakers. If I can introduce you to Tom Horrocks. So Tom is a solicitor with some 35 years experience. He was the CEO of the CLC. He's also been a board director of many large conveyances, including Simply Conveyancing, and now works as a consultant and an industry trainer. Tom, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us this afternoon. Introduced to Sam Kelly. Sam Kelly is a board director at Simply Conveyancing Property Lawyers. She's qualified, highly experienced conveyancer, and indeed the head of our legal practice. So Sam, thanks for taking time out of your busy day to speak to us as well. And Vicky Quinn Campbell, who is also a board director at Simply Conveyancing. She is the sales and marketing director and looks after all of our estate agent introducers. So Vicky, again, thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. Tom, can I kick off with you, if I may? Can you give us a brief overview, I suppose, from your perspective about what we saw in the first lockdown, how that's then going to change with regard to the second lockdown?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Ben. Yeah, I mean, the thing about the original lockdown in March of last year was that it really was unprecedented in that virtually overnight, lawyers were not sure, estate agents were not sure, removal companies were not sure whether they could continue working, and if they were going to work, then how would they work? Some conveyancers had no infrastructure in place to be able to work remotely. I mean, that does not apply to Simply Conveyancing Property Lawyers, who were able to seamlessly transition to remote working. But the nature of conveyancing means that if all the lawyers in the chain couldn't do that, then it holds everybody up. With regard to the original conveyancing problems, failed completions are nothing new. Failed completions happen for lots of reasons. People lose their jobs. Unfortunately, sometimes people die, but they were quite remote incidences. Most conveyancers will have dealt with at least one or two in their lifetimes. But the thing about COVID-19 was that it increased the likelihood that at the very last minute, a completion wouldn't go ahead, and not for reasons that, you know, we could actually do anything about. With the best will in the world, people may not find out until the night before that they needed to shield or isolate, or that they contracted this dreaded virus. And also under the first lockdown, it still applies today, and the third lockdown is that you could have a change of regulations literally overnight, whereby the government says nobody's allowed out. Just to reiterate at this point in time, conveyancing can go ahead. You can go and view properties. You can buy and sell properties. Lawyers can work, although they should work from home if they can do. Removal companies can work. Estate agents can open and work as normally. All the government asks is that you take the normal precautions of space and using masks and social distancing. But the thing about COVID-19 was that because it was nobody's fault, in the sense of people still wanted to buy and sell, but literally may not be able to complete on that day, that the government, conveyancers, and buyers and sellers all came round to the idea, quite rightly, that this is nobody's real fault. And therefore, if completion has to be delayed, what we'll do is we'll kick that completion date down the road until hopefully things have improved and people don't have to isolate, don't have to shield. And these COVID clauses, these COVID-19 riders were put in place to say the normal rules won't apply because of this pandemic. So although there's been a breach, we agreed not to sue each other for compensation or for damages or to claim a deposit and to keep it, because this is nobody's real fault. We're just trying to do the best that we possibly can. Those COVID clauses will still possibly be around. And I know Sam will talk about what the current position is as things stand today in January, but those clauses may still be around. And what they're trying to do is to say, when COVID appears and it's nobody's fault, then we won't sue each other, we won't claim for breach of contract, and we'll actually just move completion date further down the road. I think the difference this time is that the stamp duty land tax holiday, as it stands at this moment in time, and if the Chancellor, Mr. Sunak, is actually watching this, and I hope you are, that this cliff edge of the 31st of March is massively going to increase the pressure on conveyancers who have worked incredibly hard over the pandemic to keep the property market moving forward. In fact, it's stormed ahead because of their hard work, but they are under a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of people who will want to buy their property before the stamp duty holiday on the 31st of March ends. And that will add to the pressure. And I think that will impact as to if COVID clauses are going to be used, as to how they're used or whether they can be used at all. But I think I should hand over to Sam with regard to what's the likelihood of the impact of the holiday on the use of or not use of COVID-19 clauses.
Sam, you're at the front line. You're dealing with it on a day-by-day basis. Tell us what you're seeing.
So far this week, it's obviously first week back in January, so the conveyancing world is waking up a little bit after the Christmas break, but we are starting to see more requests for COVID clauses, not as many as we did last time, and I think compared to last lockdown, house moving is still allowed, so I think whilst we might see a rise in COVID clauses again, it might not be to the extremity that we had last time. Ultimately, it's like Tom said, there are always problems in conveyancing and with completions. So COVID, SDLT holiday, they're just other things for us to think about. And it means that we've got to question the clients more. We've got to get them to think about the risks more in terms of do they need to move for the stamp duty holiday? Therefore, COVID clause might not be relevant or might not be advisable. If they're going to have a COVID clause or rider in the contract, we need to get them to think about the length of the chain. Do they have a mortgage? Is the mortgage offer going to expire? Is their job safe? Are they going to go on furlough? Because they could end up in a contractual relationship and then the mortgage offer is pulled and they're liable for those costs. So there's different questions and different things that we need to be talking to them about. So it's going to take us longer sometimes to get the exchanges done because we've got to take more advice, give more advice to clients and take more instructions. Ultimately, our job is balancing our professional obligation with giving them enough advice so that our clients can make an informed choice.
Understood. So basically, it's an assessment of risk working for the client's best interests. And there's going to be potentially more than, I mean, a COVID rider might be an option to that customer pending their circumstance. What other options do you think, what other options are available to a customer?
Well, we can still exchange as normal. If that would be more advisable if there's any short time window between exchange and completion in case of some kind of COVID event. The problem with having COVID riders, it's like Tom touched on earlier on, somebody could say, I'm isolating, and you've got a COVID event, and then the contract is delayed. Now, if somebody needs to complete for the stamp duty holiday, that could take them beyond 31st of March, and they may not be able to afford to purchase the property. So with issues like that, we need to probably steer away from the COVID riders and move towards exchange as normal or planned simultaneous exchange and completions, which is what a lot of the industry moved to in last lockdown. Generally, as conveyancers, we call them SIMs, and we don't want to do a SIM. But if they're planned well and we use positive language about it and our agents are on board and using positive language about it, they are the least risky option because you don't have a contractual relationship. So if anything was to happen to a party in the chain the day before, nobody is at risk of losing their deposit. There might be some removal costs or the ability to move their removals, but it's a much less risk. And ultimately, you know, we can still make conveyancing happen. Our message to agents and clients is the wheels can keep turning. We've got the tools to do the job.
Yeah. Excellent. So basically, overall, it's a question of assessing each individual circumstance to assess the risk. And there's basically three options available: either exchange with the COVID clause. In certain cases, we can exchange and complete in the normal way, but would strongly suggest a very short window between exchange and completion, or we plan a simultaneous exchange and completion, all to happen on the same day, which is excellent. Thank you, Sam, much appreciated. Vicky, as I said before, you look after our agents. Probably now more so than ever, it's imperative that we work in lockstep. One of the advantages that Simply Conveyancing has always had is that we work so closely with our agency referrers. Talk to us, how can they help us at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. So utilising our tech is really the key. As you know, we have our sales progression portal. It's a really useful tool for our agents to gain updates on a transaction, and it should really always be their first port of call before calling the lawyer. If the update they require isn't on the portal, then of course send the lawyer an email or give them a call, but that's what reduces our telephone traffic and gives the lawyer more time to work on files or speak to clients, which is ultimately what our agents should want them doing. Help us manage client expectations in busy times, remaining positive and trusting us that we'll be working as efficiently as we can. It's as important to us at Simply to complete on their pipeline as it is to the agent, and if they trust that, that's very helpful. Chain details, the more information the better, also helps us communicate with other agents and solicitors in the chain. Alongside acting on both sides, get control of the pipeline. The more links in the chain that Simply have, the better communication is and the easier it is, and it'll have a direct impact on pipeline conversion. So that's really what we've been saying. We've got a team of dedicated industry experts in our sales team that are constantly on board, making contact with our agents to help where possible. We know it's a busy time and everybody's got these huge sales pipelines that they want to see exchanged out, but that's what we do. So we're just proactively talking to everybody and keeping positive.
Excellent. So it's basically the old adage, communication. Tell us. So by being able to communicate to them about quantity of data or information, I suppose, about personal circumstance. And I suppose the second part of that is consistency of message. Know that there's really the three main options available to the customers, and working out which is the main option, which is best for their personal circumstance at that time.
Yeah, and also we've kind of encouraged our agents now to really understand how motivated the buyer is to move and their commitment to move regardless of the stamp duty deadline of the 31st of March. So, now we're in January, we have to be realistic and manage client expectations. And I think understanding their motivation and that is really important. So, a lot of our agents are understanding that at the point of offer stage now.
Excellent. Fantastic. Tom, Sam, Vicky, thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon. It's appreciated. And to everyone out there, I hope you found that useful. Thank you.